Okay, we enter into the 1892 turn in Pax, and lots of merchant fleets showing up on a number of different countries. But we had two events. First was German colonial, well, three events actually, but one was an unrest in Cuba, which is going to add some interest to the situation. But first one was a German colonial agitation. Increased tensions by two. The Germans are going to get double their colonial office, but the other is the American Yellow Press. This is an event the U.S. loves to get, and it's a good time to get it. The U.S. is kind of in a good position here. The U.S. is going to get double their income. They must spend at least 30 pounds on, or francs, or bucks, or whatever, on maintaining and constructing military units this game turn. This is going to give the United States a casus belli against Spain. And what's interesting about this one, most of the non-event driven casus belli, there's sort of a fairly decent description of how you should handle them. Although I looked that over and I'm not sure I fully handled Portugal correctly. If they place a protectorate, they're not going to back down from war. You can bring it to the Congress of Europe, which is essentially what happened. But I was under a little bit of a misunderstanding. You can't just tell a minor, yeah, no, you can't go there, and they'll just back down unless somebody supports them. However, the Congress was willing to come to that agreement, so it all worked out the same. But in this case, nobody can really support Spain. Nobody can sign an alliance with Spain as they would with each other or whatever. Spain is pretty much left to the U.S.'s whim, as far as I'm concerned, from my reading of it. Which feels a little funny. It feels like most of the miners will accept help from someone else. And it also feels to me that the major powers could have stepped in and prevented the Spanish-American War. Either prevented it or sided on it. And it's a pretty big event for the U.S. In this game, certainly, if that was allowed, it would almost always happen, though. Countries like Britain want to stick their nose in anything that somebody else can gain from, and either get some gain, as they have throughout, or just stop it from happening. And here, the majors just so far outshine the U.S. in terms of power. The U.S. hasn't been building military, but at least they have enough income they should be able to put a decent-sized fleet into play, etc. Alrighty. Let's get started with the paperwork. Okay, well, the game's progressing a little oddly at this point because players who have come up with actions have not necessarily been the strong players. The Brits came up with one and slipped themselves into Anatolia with an influence marker. But countries like Italy, who don't really have a lot they want to do particularly, or can do. If it was late in the turn, they might try to slip into Tunis or Berbera or something like that. But as of right now, if they made a move like that, somebody would be all over them. France, England, whatever. They've been doing fairly well, getting into Egypt, getting into Madagascar, where they really probably can't get much more territory without offending someone. Now, they have a whole pile of little, flags and everything, but they got no chance of getting those established, at least in valuable areas. They might be able to take something really crappy. They might be able to get away with, like, Southwest Africa or Gabon or something like that if they wanted to. Those tend to be money losers, though, and as long as you still have influence markers, hey, it's better to kind of see what you can grab early in the game. Yeah, or what you can grab, what's the best thing you can grab if you get a chance late. So they're kind of playing a delaying game. Russia ran out of influence and interest markers, so they're having to do some kind of control into Turkomania just to make these victory points turn into something that, I don't know. It's not going to lose money, I don't think. Let's see. It probably loses compared to the interest marker, but they can put that somewhere else. But at $4, they're producing 16 and paying 10, so they make $6 a turn off of that. So that's kind of cool to have. If the game were going to end soon, which it probably isn't, you would definitely be considering not building these things up because they're going to lose you money. Japan decides to upgrade Korea, and they kicked everybody out of there. All kinds of players had interest in Korea. Most of them just withdrew. Japan said, "Hey, you want to pull your pieces out?" Britain said, "No, I like my piece there. I want the European tensions to go up due to having to remove." This is one of the options. You can remove pieces for free during the marker placement segment, but once you get to negotiations, it's going to cost some European tension to remove pieces. Britain wants tensions to go up. No one else does. Britain's in a weird situation in this game. They don't feel comfortable at all. Countries like Germany and Italy have gotten too big a jump because of the threat that France provided so early in the game. And when that happens, Britain may not win. They have to be extra diligent, and at this point, they kind of have to be willing to cut a deal with France. And we'll see what that comes to, whether or not the alliance with France involves an actual formal alliance giving France victory points. I think that's highly unlikely, but if they want a really stable alliance, they may have to do that. Alternatively, you've got comers like Germany saying, "Yeah, I got a lot of influence markers here, but I don't have a lot of places to put them. My ships are kind of spread up into China as far as I can go. I've got North China I can do. And then what? After I do that, where do I go? I've got some possible possessions, things like Berbera or Tunis. I've moved into the Mediterranean finally again. But I think somebody's going to tell me no to those. What do I do?" And likewise, over here in Indochina, that's a nice location. France and England could agree to split it or something, or France could just get it on their own. But Germany can't really enforce their will there. So there aren't a lot of opportunities open for the small countries at this point. And for the large ones, they're grabbing crap. Because most of the world's been divided. This doesn't always fall this way. Sometimes it stays less of a land grab, but Germany managed a massive land grab, and Italy also grabbed a couple. And that means we've got kind of crap to fill in the French route, but other than that, I don't think there's much except by what comes up through unrest. So in a sense, the game's almost over at this point, even though we're going to have to play through it for a while. As we continue, some of the smaller countries are worrying about building up their navies instead. If they get early picks here, so Italy has a lot of money, so they haven't a lot of money left. They haven't had a lot of picks. So they've kind of been putting their influences down, increasing their economics. But if you look at countries like Germany or Japan, they're looking at their international position and saying, we cannot really grow in any significant way unless we build a bigger military. Now, for Japan, that was kind of a lie. Japan could have tossed its shipping here and gone into Mexico with an influence, or grabbed some stuff down in Oceania. But really, grabbing possession of those cheap areas generally doesn't really help a country too much. It becomes an economic drain on them. So increasing your navy to about the size of the big powers, not quite, and there's no cost in European tensions when US or Japan builds ships, or Britain for that matter. But by doing that, you're making yourself a player on the big stage. And you may be causing a war eventually, but you're putting yourself in a position where now you've got this bargaining chip that you can maybe gain something a little more valuable than you would get otherwise, more safely. Now, Japan probably could have gotten away with something like New Hebrides. Nobody really is too intent on Japan's growth. They couldn't get into China, and they do have a couple valuable areas. So there might have been a backlash. They feel like they need the Navy in order to ensure themselves that they have some diplomatic pressure. The Germans were in the unique position to grab this and cut the French east-west path as it was being built. That's bad. Germany has this fantasy, which may or may not be correct, that, okay, permanent offensive defensive alliance with France, and I trade you this for Tanganyika. That's kind of their bargaining point. Or Indochina if you insist, because we could get possession of that. But when it comes down to it, it's really you give me something more valuable and we have this permanent alliance. The danger of a permanent alliance, it means bullshit, because you can break an alliance at any time. The only cost is an increase in European tensions. You don't pay a price for being perfidious. So that doesn't mean much, but sometimes players will stick with agreements like that. And, it's not terribly to France's disadvantage. They get 2 points per turn, plus a big German navy that's being, well, it's not there yet. But Germany is committed to building their navy up so that they too can be a player. They don't have a whole hell of a lot they can get away with right now. So that's appealing. On the other hand, Germany can't expand, say, into a retreat, Berbera, because if they do so, then they're laying down a threat that France could go capitalize on to try to start a war, which would allow them to get this location. Pushing your way into places, I mean, okay, at worst, Germany could back down, but then they lose the money. So they want their naval power in order to make the bargaining. The problem is, right now the French-British alliance has too many rational reasons for existing to stomp these little powers that have grown too much, and especially someone like Germany. So I don't even know. There's not much they can do to stop Germany from doing this. They may take the bargain, and then with the understanding on their side that they're going to screw Germany over if it comes down to a fight. All right, well, keep going. Just the vagaries of how this die falls. I think it matches fairly well how a real play goes in terms of, like, every now and then people seem to really worry about not playing their pieces, but quite often they just go out and play them when they know what they want to do. And although there's an advantage to always holding back, if you always hold back, people start noticing that. But if you do it very seldomly, sometimes you can get away with it. I don't know. However that works. So at the end of the movement combat phase, well, Italy ended with a ton of money. They didn't want to invest it in navies. They're going to use it towards victory points. But they also didn't really have any more economic places they could put it in. In fact, where they shut it in here, over in Berbera, the English built a protectorate to drive even an influence out. When they saw just how nasty England and or France was willing to be, they basically said, well, I can't go if England's going to hold money. And England said, well, I'm going to hold $10 and I'm going to put an influence somewhere. So you could go into a couple of places. You'll get the worst of them. It'll be a 3. A 3 is the best that's available. But anything else, you're going to have to back down in. So, with $60, they don't have quite enough. They could build 3 protectorates, but they don't have quite enough when you look at the money for the infantry they'd have to build for that in order to go into other places. They could put influences or interests into places, and that is of some value, there's no question. I probably should throw at least a couple of them in. Get here into Aden and Baluchistan. But basically all the 4-point areas that are available have been covered. The only exception there is Sarawak, and the Japanese have something there. Burma, which nobody can really get to but the British right now, but they're putting a protectorate there. basically there aren't any places where they can advance to. And that's the problem Germany, Japan, and Italy face. For Italy, they made the choice to hold their money, which is what Belgium's been doing all game. Germany has chosen to build a big navy and try to become a player. The problem is they're not going to find any support from England or France. And that's kind of where Italy looked at, is they said, now wait a minute, England and France are kind of allied. Unless they come to blows, it's not going to matter. Now, if they come to blows, Germany can introduce themselves into this. Now, and Germany has a lot of territory. They're in kind of a nice position. Maybe they should be the ones stockpiling money, but they also do want to remain a player. Italy doesn't feel like it can be one, so it's going to go into that. I'm going to dump all my money into victory points from now on. And again, form another baseline along with Belgium there. The U.S. built up as much military as they can. It's not a guaranteed thing, but they have a decent-sized navy, 13 points in the North Atlantic, and enough armies. They should be able to take what they historically did, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. They may even be able to get Morocco out of this. I don't know how big their interest is in Rio de Oro. That's pretty non-valuable. I mean, it's a worthless area. You may leave Spain with that, just because it isn't worth anything. But Morocco is usually worth taking. It's as good as Puerto Rico. And we put ourselves into the North Atlantic in order to impose our strength there. Now that means we're not getting into these rich areas in the South Atlantic, but we didn't really have an easy way to get there with the number of merchant ships we have. We're over in the North China Sea already. I feel that's vital for the Americans to try to prevent the Chinese situation from ending up being a carving up of China. I think we've got some. I've got to roll the military situations. I don't even know if we have many conflicts that really need to be resolved. We have this one where the Italians are going to have to back down pretty much. And over here where the Japanese are going to have to back down. Neither one can face the big powers. Japan has a hell of a navy. It's possible you might see a Japanese-German coalition to protect that if the Germans can't get the treaty they want from... yeah, they're just not big enough, and if England comes into that, it's all over. So, I don't know. So pretty much things panned out as they had been discussed during the marker playing phase. The Germans gave up Sokoto in exchange for the share in Tanganyika. That gives them some additional wealth. They also signed a permanent offensive-defensive treaty with France. France and Russia signed a mutual defensive treaty for the turn. Russia's kind of hoping and asking for a more permanent treaty. France is in this interesting position. They could probably, with this alliance, arrange to bring Britain down. The problem, of course, is you got to kind of calculate at this point, what would victory be? Where are we right now? Who's in the lead? I hate doing those kind of calculations. I feel like they're somewhat unreasonable. My guess is, from my knowledge of this game, Britain is still in the lead over Germany and France. That you have to actually take Britain down to win this game if you're not Britain. Now, there's an exception to that. Countries like Italy, if they get sole ownership of Egypt or something like that, can pretty much win the game. But things aren't getting pushed this turn. England and France weren't on a collision course anyway. Russia might be interested because of their ability to, and might be interesting because of their potential ability to schwack into India. But right now, they only have 10 troops they could use in there. They have to build a bigger army, and they don't have that. What we do have is the war between U.S. and Spain. And essentially, we roll a die and see which one goes first. So the U.S. will be the first alliance there. And they don't have an ally to call on. Spain doesn't have the right to make alliances. So we'll start maneuvering. And really, the biggest and most important thing is to get the fleet out into the Caribbean where it can start to operate. Fleets are allowed to be where there's coaling rights, which means there's something adjacent. They could make it out to the North Atlantic, in fact, which may be a wiser move. We'll go out there. We can sail straight to the North Atlantic from the U.S. And we'll send this other one up to the North Pacific to help protect our ability to land in the Philippines. We want to land some troops in the Philippines. No, we're not allowed to cross that, I think. I've got to look up the naval rules to see. There has to be some kind of engagement, I think, there. I'm not sure how that works anymore. I remember noticing something kind of interesting. And the rest of the army, well, we'll ship them into... Wait, we can't put them in the Caribbean because they're kind of at risk there. We probably don't want to send our entire force out, but I mean, there's a chance if our Navy gets driven away, these will be captured if that happens, and that could be kind of risky. But I think I've got a big enough Navy that the Spaniards can't really defeat it. They only have 6 points of ships, and I have 13. That's 1-2 over here. Yeah, that could get a retreat. Let's not send everything. Let's keep some armies behind, because if our army is captured, it means we get it back still. But we won't be able to win this war without an army. And we'll eventually have to give up in some sort or another. So I have to look up about how the Americans can land down here. Oh, I'm going to need some troops to do that too. I don't want to really risk too many units. I'll just send another 3 up that way. And those troops are actually on board the merchant ship to be able to move there. Alright, I forgot to spend the $5 on European or 5 points of European tension. It's up in the 50s already. For the declaration of war that the U.S. had to make. I don't want to launch these guys here because I can actually sail my ships into the Philippines and attack the Spaniards there. Now for the Spaniards, things are a little more problematic. I've got a pretty decent force sitting here in Cuba with 7 strength points. The question is, how am I going to be able to defeat this Navy? And the only way I can see is I have to do the ahistorical, and I'll send that attack out. Because otherwise, I'm outnumbered with the ships that I have in Cuba. And I've got 6 to his 13. That's 1-3. That's no good. I can't do that. 1-3. The best I can get in is an exchange. 1-2 the same. I really can't win this fight. So I'm going to hold on the defensive here and hope that something good happens. And the same over there, which means I really can't even send my troops. Now I don't have troops anywhere else, but that means it's the first round of the war is over, and that goes down to what, 2 extra points for the war and determination phase because nothing's happened. You can remember the last war ended real quickly. Alright. And now, and this one isn't too tough either. Now we're back on the U.S. turn. I have got to deal with Cuba in order to invade it. I'm going to land some troops in Puerto Rico. And I got a problem here. I can't really land these troops in Africa. I'd like to do it more quickly, but I can't do it because they'll be out of supply if the Spaniards manage to sail into the North Atlantic. And I'm using my Navy on Cuba itself. And likewise, I'm sailing out here to land my Army in the Philippines, or my Navy in the Philippines, but I'm also going to transfer a couple of troops there to take that over into the North Pacific to make the landing. So now we got a couple of quick naval battles here, and this one's 13-3, that's 4-1 on the little chart. One yellow, it's an exchange. So both sides lose their some of their navy. And I'm still here. And then over here I have a 2-1 attack. One yellow exchange. The American Navy is getting beaten up here. Gotta be careful with that. And I'm running out of video, so I'm gonna split this and load it up in two. Okay, well again, Spain doesn't really have anything they can do. There's no harm to shifting the Navy out. I don't know who's playing Spain right now. You kind of pick that by a coalition group or whatever. But nobody sees any real harm to trying to prevent this from happening by sending the Navy out to the North Atlantic. That really, oh, I did a landing here that I didn't count. Let's see, 4-1 there. And again, no defensive bonus for the terrain or whatever. That's an orange. That's a defender retreat. The Spanish would have to retreat into a legitimate sea zone. Well, because there was no American Navy here anymore. Let me put the Spaniards back where they were. Because there's no American Navy here, they're actually withdrawn. And the Americans grab Puerto Rico. And I could mark that with something other than troops. Because the Americans now own it and have it garrisoned even if they move their major troop forces. For the regular place of the turn, you need troops to garrison things. But once you actually enter warfare, you can be assumed to have smaller forces. So now for the Spaniards, let's see. I definitely want to slide this out. I can't land troops in Cuba because it's defended. So I'm going to throw these down over here in Morocco. And in fact, we're going to pull the troops from Rio de Oro too. And try to defend that as best we can. And now we get two more European tension because the war's not over. And let's see. Well, the Americans can start shifting forces. First thing they want to do, they want to actually fight that fleet. What if they lose? They've got 3-1. Can they lose? It doesn't look like they can. So I can shift my troops out into the Atlantic at this point. And I don't have a whole hell of a lot. And I'll send these out too. Leave a little American flag here at Puerto Rico to indicate that that's in the captured state. And then likewise, I'll land here in the Philippines. I can set sail with this ship. It's not doing anything. It'll go back up. I've got coaling rights in Alaska, so I can go back up there. And at the Philippines, I have 6-1. I don't know if I needed that much. But that gives me the 3-1 table, where an exchange will not destroy my occupation. I don't get an exchange anyway. These troops are actually killed again. And the Americans have taken the Philippines. As we can see, it's pretty much a blowout. I'm going to finish up the American turn, the combat, but I don't need to go into this much detail for each one. It's a very simplistic, system. But time is your cost. The longer it takes, the more it's going to drive up European tensions. And That's got a negative effect for just about everyone but Britain, perhaps. Everyone but whoever's leading the game at that point. Who's leading the game right now? I'm assuming it's Britain, but again, I don't want to go and try to calculate that out. One way to look, though, is when you look at the income amounts. That big 425 is pretty important for England. England is making, what, 500, about 600 bucks a turn. France is making about under 200, I think. France's divisor is a 7, England's is a 10. There's not that much light between their divisors. So having multiples of the other person's income coming in probably means that the English are well ahead at this point still. So to me, that means that England is actually somewhat interested in that German alliance or the Russian alliance. The German one's more advantageous to them because it involves navies, but the Russian one comes with a lower price in the sense that Germany is scary. They're producing quite a bit on their own, almost as much as France is. Well, maybe more than France is in total income. Of course, a lot of that's influences, which isn't that big a deal. But as long as they can come to some sort of equitable distribution, it's probably in France's best interest to try to take England down, I think. A lot of babbling for no apparent reason. I'll finish up the war, and I'll come back and I'll talk a little bit more after that. Well, just as a quick action here, the Spanish army in Cuba ended up getting the Americans got a bad roll against them for their point of view. The entire army ended up surrendering. It got a retreat result. Couldn't go into the Atlantic because the Navy's up there. So the entire force is now in the U.S. That'll be returned to Spain so that they can defend their colonies or whatever else they want to do with it. But it can't serve any more purpose in this war. Surrender is kind of a neat effect because you do get your pieces back. And most of the time you end up fighting like we've seen where you lose your pieces, and it's not as bad to have them just interned for the rest of the war. Tensions go up a couple more. The Americans went in with their big ship and attacked in Morocco. They've assembled their forces here. Their remaining navy from the Pacific, I believe, has made it over here. Remember, they have the canal, so it's easier for them to slip through. Well, the Spanish got a retreat into the Mediterranean, then were able to break out and hit the North Atlantic. Almost a chance to take out the entire American army. It would have been a tough war had that happened. The Americans probably would not be able to continue into Africa if that fight happened. Now, the Spaniards couldn't face this fleet and prevent the Americans from taking what they've already taken, but it would have been a more historical end point. Instead, though, it looks like the Americans sunk the Spanish fleet, and now they can land their army in Morocco and take that in Rio de Oro if they want it. Rio de Oro is not worth a hell of a lot, but hey, a free possession is kind of a nice thing. We'll see. And as we enter the 1896 turn, let's take a look. You see the U.S. has the Caribbeans, they have the Philippines over there, and they have the North African. They even took the Rio de Oro. Just as a matter of the board's filling up fast, it's time to get your claims down. Now, the truth of the matter is this thing, especially as a possession, may cost more money and more victory points than it's worth, but I like owning things. Calculating out every detail in this, hey, it's a way to improve your chances of winning, but I don't believe that squeezing those points out is where you're going to win anyway. And this is something of an experience game. You certainly want to be cognizant of, who's winning and whatnot in order to have an effect on it, because if you play it without bothering about the winning and losing, there will be no conflict. There's no reason for it. But once you start bothering with it, well, you start to see, hey, Britain's going to win if we don't take her down. And now France is in that position, seeing, even though I've gotten good deals with Britain, and I've seen this happen before, a French-British alliance where they split the world, essentially, Britain's head start is so high, somebody's got to take her down for there to be any chance. And whoever's there standing in the wreckage of Britain and grabbing the goodies is the one who wins. Or Britain ends up driving them back. There are possibilities, some of the small countries. when we look over at victory points, well, we're seeing the bar being raised by the Belgians. That may be enough. Right now they're at 129 victory points. Now this game, if it ends early, it often ends with very few victory points. But if it ends kind of middle to late, 129 is a pretty significant amount. It's not going to win Belgium the game, though. At this point, the English have more in India than Belgium can win. Their only hope is that the world just deteriorates so much. If people's armies are wrecked and they can no longer keep their possessions and protectorates, it's possible that some neutral bystander could win like that. But that barrier, I'm looking at that as kind of the bar. It's just not enough. And I've always kind of seen it that way. I calculated it out for Italy before. You just can't do it. You've got to own stuff. You've got to get stuff. And that makes me happy. But it does mean Belgium's a pointless power. They're getting another trading fleet there. I don't have counters for them. Anyway, let's see other people. At their 129, they're at the highest. The next beneath them are in the 20s. Italy, Germany, the U.S. Those kind of victory points is how England can get good victory points off stuff like off the Panama Canal, because that doesn't go through their divisor, so it's kind of nice for them. But even for the U.S., it's a decent deal, but it's not great. It's not fantastic. The main thing is depriving England of the right to build the canal. All right, we're going to load this one up, and we'll start into 1896.